Welcome back to our news bulletin. The US and the Taliban are set to sign a peace deal in Doha today that could signal the end of Washington's longest war. The agreement will lead to a reduction of American troops from Afghanistan in return for security guarantees from the Taliban. In a statement, US President Donald Trump said the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will attend the Doha ceremony. He said the Afghan people must seize the opportunity for peace and a new future for the country. A 31-member delegation of the Taliban has reached Doha. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi will represent Pakistan that played a key role in the peace process. Last week, Qatar's ambassador Sakar bin Mubarak al-Mansouri formally invited Qureshi to the signing ceremony. Dignitaries of nearly 30 states and international organizations will attend the event. The US and the Afghan Taliban are set to sign a historic peace deal after months of on-off talks. But why was the US fighting a war in Afghanistan, and why did it last so long? Let's watch this report to find out.
On September 11, 2001, a terrorist attack on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington killed nearly 3,000 people. The attacks dramatically changed the world's political landscape. The United States believed that the Afghanistan-based Osama bin Laden, the head of Al-Qaeda, was behind the outrages. The Taliban, who ran Afghanistan and protected bin Laden, refused to hand him over. A month later in October, the then US President George W. Bush ordered airstrikes against Afghanistan. The US targeted bin Laden's Al-Qaeda and also the Taliban. As other countries joined the war, the Taliban were rapidly forced from power in December the same year. The Taliban were driven out of parts of southern Afghanistan, but this didn't last. As international forces began to withdraw from the fighting, the Taliban were able to regroup. For 18 years, the Taliban and US forces have exchanged attacks, killing thousands of fighters and innocent civilians. In 2012, the first initiative was taken for a peace deal between the two warring sides, but this broke down 2 months later. Since then, the US and its allies have struggled to strike a peace deal. Negotiations between both sides in Doha entered their highest level last week, building on momentum that began in late 2018. The peace talks centered on the withdrawal of all foreign troops from Afghanistan.
Pakistan is a home to one of the world's largest refugee populations, hosting 1.4 million registered Afghan refugees. They hope the US Taliban peace deal will allow them to return to their home country. Details in this report.
Pakistan has been hosting Afghan refugees since the 1979 Russian invasion of Afghanistan. The 1992 civil war and 2001 invasion by the US forced Afghans to flee the violence in their country.
The Russians came and bombarded our village. Then we left our houses, and it was not possible for us to live in there. We spent 3 nights in the mountains. We took refuge here with my children to the mountains.
In a few hours, the US is going to sign a peace deal with the Taliban. Afghan refugees are hopeful that the agreement will mark an end to the decades-long conflict.
This is good news, and may God bring peace and stability. I was going back 2 years ago, as my neighbors know. I packed up everything and I was leaving, but there is no peace and stability. Therefore, I stayed back here. If peace comes, we will be happy to go back to our homeland.
The refugees are weary of 40 years of war in the country. Afghan migrants also want intra-Afghan talks for a long-lasting peace in their country.
We are happy about the US Taliban deal, and then the intra-Afghan talks should start. We are happy and optimistic about it if an intra-Afghan dialogue is held, and then the Afghan refugees go back to their homes safely.
The peace accord will be signed in Doha. This will lead the withdrawal of thousands of US troops from Afghanistan. Pakistan has welcomed the agreement, saying it's a positive development for peace in the region.
For more on this, we are joined by Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, former ambassador and analyst from capital Islamabad. Thank you for your time. Now, Mr. Qazi, the US and Taliban are set to sign a peace deal in Doha today that could signal the end of Washington's longest war. How do you see this development for the peace and stability of our region?
I think this is a very major development. It was expected to have taken place earlier, sometime last year, but then Trump suddenly pulled out. But now it's happened. Pakistan has made a contribution to making it possible. And so in and of itself, this particular deal is more than welcome, bringing to an end 18 years of absolute hell and misery for the Afghan people and also, to a great extent, its neighbors. However, there are many things where we have to be concerned with. The context in which this development is taking place, and in fact in which all events in the world are taking place, is number one, within the immediate global crisis of, COVID-19 or the coronavirus. This is going to impact on every single development. And if this does not lead to peace, this will end up resulting in a major expansion of this plague in Afghanistan, which would then immediately impact on its neighbors, including Pakistan. Don't want to go into any detail, but this is a major, major consideration. The other thing is now, what are the next steps? Will the Taliban be willing to speak with the government in Kabul, which is, just concluded an election, and the results of which were announced many weeks or months later? Which is controversial, and we know the Taliban will not speak directly with Kabul. They will be willing to meet with them indirectly, as they have in the past. Secondly, the election results will mean nothing, because the Taliban will insist on, and will have a right to insist on, a sharing of power. So that will put an end to the results of this election in Afghanistan, and then they'll have to plan for an election which would include Afghanistan a couple of years down the line, because the Taliban would have to become a political party, would have to be able to participate in a political process before they'd be ready to take part in an election. Secondly, how long is it going to take for the U.S. to withdraw from Afghanistan? We keep hearing the word about 18 months. Will they leave bases behind of one kind or another? Which would that be acceptable to the Taliban? All of these things are important. What about constitutional changes to make it acceptable to the Taliban? You can't do too many changes, because that would alienate a large segment of opinion in Afghanistan, particularly women, and so the Taliban, have they changed to that extent that they will accommodate the demands of the women of Afghanistan, which are very appropriate demands and all? And how much flexibility is there in the Taliban without them splitting? And if they split, then they lose their negotiating ability. So it's a very complicated process. Nonetheless, a very fortunate development, and let's hope that it will lead to a stable peace.
Mr. Qazi, you rightfully said that Pakistan has made a contribution towards this peace deal. Now, moving forward, one can only hope that this deal will be honored by all the parties. Is there any challenge to peace even after the deal is signed? And how do you see Pakistan's role after the deal?
There's nothing but challenges. There will be a challenge every moment. The past shows that these kinds of deals don't last, but nonetheless, there is a desperate war weariness amongst the people of Afghanistan. There is also in America an election coming, and Trump wants to show that he's got some major achievement to his credit, which is a withdrawal from Afghanistan, bringing back a whole lot of troops, if not all of them. So there is a great opportunity now, despite the fact that in the past such agreements have broken down very quickly, when you have had ceasefires temporarily, etc. But I think there is very good reason, if there is sincerity, if they talk with each other, and Pakistan can play a very important role, provided it can develop trust with the Afghan factions and also with the United States. Now the fact of the matter is the United States is looking at a broader game vis-a-vis Russia and China, and may not want to completely withdraw from Afghanistan. That would spell trouble, because as if an American fighting presence remains in Afghanistan under whatever pretext, it will ensure instability in Afghanistan and will prevent the refugees from returning to Afghanistan.
That was Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, former ambassador and analyst from the capital Islamabad. Thank you for your time. Now we have with us Rahimullah Yusufzai, analyst from Peshawar, Pakistan. Thank you for your time. Mr. Yousafzai, Pakistan has been playing a major role in the peace in Afghanistan and in the region. How do you see Pakistan's role after the deal between the US and the Taliban is signed?
If there is peace in Afghanistan, it will have a positive impact on Pakistan. So in a way, we have made amends. We are now playing a very positive role. And I think this will improve Pakistan's image as well. We are also hoping that, the Afghan government would also take care of Pakistani sensitivities regarding India's role in Afghanistan. So there are a number of, expectations concerning the peace agreement, and I think even in future, Pakistan's role will remain important because these intra-Afghan dialogue, this is going to be even more challenging, and it is possible that these talks will break down, as happened in the case of the US-Taliban talks, and then Pakistan was able to get the talks resumed. So I think Pakistan's role has not ended.
Mr. Yousafzai, now let's talk about future projections. How do you see Ashraf Ghani's future for his government?
This is going to be a very serious issue because Taliban do not recognize the government of Ashraf Ghani or before that of Hamid Karzai, and they had refused to talk to this government. Even now, a delegation from Kabul is in Qatar, and Taliban are refusing to meet the delegation. Also, there are very serious internal differences in Afghanistan between the supporters and opponents of Ashraf Ghani. Dr. Abdullah has refused to accept the result of the presidential election, and he is setting up his own parallel government. So I think this could actually block or delay the intra-Afghan dialogue. And, Taliban would be hoping that these differences increase because that will make them stronger in the negotiation process.
That was Rahimullah Yousafzai, analyst from Peshawar, Pakistan. Thank you for your time. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to our news bulletin. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the world must act to stop the genocide of Muslims in India. In a series of tweets, Khan said Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is doing the same in New Delhi that he did in Gujarat as the Chief Minister. Referring to the killing of 42 people in riots over the controversial citizenship law, Khan said Modi's fascist agenda is similar to that of the Nazis. He said images of Muslim homes and businesses being burnt in India are reminiscent of what Nazis did in Germany. The Prime Minister strongly condemned violence against Indian Muslims as well as desecration of their mosques and graveyards. In India, New Delhi's week-long riots during anti-citizenship law protests have drastically compromised the safety of the citizens. As deadly violence erupted, a small hospital in a densely packed Muslim neighborhood found itself at the epicenter of the unrest. More in this report.
42 people were killed as Hindu radicals targeted 4 mosques, 79 houses, and 52 shops owned by Muslims. Al-Hind Hospital was flooded with patients, and it has also become a place of refuge for people whose homes were burnt or destroyed.
I was beaten, and they vandalized my house and set everything on fire. I was beaten in this situation. We came here on Tuesday. They torched 3 houses and left nothing.
Doctors described being overwhelmed when dozens of wounded streamed into the 15-bed, 2-story building. Some were carried on people's shoulders, others on wooden carts, stretching the hospital's resources to the limits.
The mob particularly targeted vital organs. It felt as the attackers knew human anatomy as if they were from a medical profession. The 2 injured and other injuries that we saw were in the same condition, as all the stabs are in the vital organs.
69 people have been killed in various incidents since India passed the Citizenship Amendment Act on 11th December.
Russia and Turkey have agreed to reduce tensions on the ground in Syria's Idlib province while continuing their fight against terrorists. Following several days of talks in Ankara, the Russian Foreign Ministry said concrete steps to achieve lasting stability in Idlib were considered. Russian Foreign Ministry said both sides will focus on fighting terrorists recognized by the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he asked his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin to get out of our way in Idlib. Erdogan said Ankara will keep the doors open for refugees heading to Europe. Tensions surged between Ankara and Moscow after 33 Turkish soldiers died in an airstrike in Syria. Earlier, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for a ceasefire in Syria before the situation spirals entirely out of control. Speaking at a Security Council meeting, Guterres said the killing of Turkish troops in Syria is one of the most alarming moments in the 9-year war. More in this report.
Tensions in Syria have been high since Turkish and Syrian government forces began attacking each other in Idlib province. The 15-member UN Security Council met after Russian-backed Syrian troops killed 33 Turkish soldiers. At the meeting, Turkey and Russia exchanged heated arguments. The Turkish ambassador said it's time for a political solution to the Syrian conflict, or civilians will continue to suffer.
Mr. President, yesterday's events are a stark reminder that the regime is hell-bent on continuing its attacks to intimidate Syrian civilians, as well as destroy Syrian opposition and the prospects for a political solution.
The Russian envoy, Vasily Nebenzia, argued the Syrian army has the right to respond to any ceasefire violations within the Idlib zone. But, he said, Moscow is ready to reduce conflict in the area to avoid such tragedies in the future.
We regret the fact that the Turkish soldiers died, just as we regret the reports about the death of Syrian soldiers who were convinced that respecting the agreements, including on the conflicting, will avoid such tragedies in the future. Our forces on the ground are prepared to work towards that.
The US President, Donald Trump, also condemned the attack on Turkish soldiers. In a statement, Trump called on Russia and Syria to stop the Idlib operation.
Malaysia's King Abdullah has appointed former Interior Minister Muhyiddin Yassin as the country's new Prime Minister. Earlier, interim Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad claimed to secure majority to become the new Premier with the support of his on-off ally Anwar Ibrahim. In a statement, the King's Palace said Muhyiddin will be sworn in tomorrow. It said the process to appoint the Prime Minister cannot be delayed. The Prime Minister appointee Yassin has asked for all Malaysians to accept decision by the National Palace. Earlier, Mohamad said agreed to be the prime ministerial candidate after talks with coalition parties. Uncertainty has loomed over Malaysian politics since Mahathir Mohamad resigned from office last Friday. In China, another 47 people have died during the last 24 hours, victims of the new coronavirus outbreak, which puts the number of dead at over 2,800. The National Health Commission has recorded 427 new cases, raising the number of infections to 79,000. More in this report.
While there has been a slowdown in the number of virus casualties in China, the outbreak is intensifying in some other countries. South Korea says it has recorded 594 more cases today, making this the country's largest infection increase to date. Japan has closed schools, Switzerland has banned rallies, while flights are being cancelled worldwide. Iran's health ministry says 34 people have died in the country. It says it rejects reports of the BBC of 210 deaths. The World Health Organization says the risk of new coronavirus at a global level is now very high.
We are on the highest level of alert, or the highest level of risk assessment in terms of spread and in terms of impact. But that is not in order to alarm or scare people. And I think this is a reality check for every government on the planet. Wake up, get ready. This virus may be on its way and you need to be ready.
The UN says it is concerned by the spread of the disease. Secretary General is urging the international community to step up efforts and combat the illness together.
The greatest enemy right now is not the virus, It is fear, rumors, and stigma. Now it's the time for all governments to step up and do everything possible to contain the disease, and to do so without stigmatization and respecting human rights. We know containment is possible, but the window of opportunity is narrowing.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has banned entry of citizens from the member states of Gulf Cooperation Council in the holy cities of Mecca and Medina over virus fears.
In Paris, several actresses have walked out of the Caesar Awards ceremony after Roman Polanski won the Best Director award. Polanski was convicted in 1977 of statutory rape.
This year's awards have been mired in controversy after Polanski's latest film, An Officer and a Spy, received 12 nominations. Earlier this month, the entire board of the Caesar Awards resigned because of anger prompted by Polanski topping the list of nominations. Actress Adele Haenel, who recently alleged that she was sexually assaulted by another French director, was the first to walk out of the room. In an interview, Haenel said honoring Polanski is equivalent to promoting rape. Meanwhile, protesters against Polanski's nomination urged the film industry to stop encouraging rape culture.
For us, Polanski's 12 nominations is telling of a system within the French film industry which awards men accused of sexual abuse and rape at the expense of women and minors, generally very young women. And by awarding these men, we're putting in place a system of impunity at their expense, and this protects them of their acts and maintains victims in a form of silence. And all this makes sexual violence continue within the film industry. This encourages rape culture.
Polanski was convicted of assaulting a 13-year-old girl. He escaped to France before he could be sentenced, where he has remained ever since.
Car-making giant Volkswagen has agreed on a settlement with the German Consumer Federation, the VZBW, over the 2015 emissions scandal. A court in Braunschweig announced that 260,000 German customers will receive compensation depending on the model and age of the car. The settlement is significantly less than the $15 billion payout U.S. judge ordered the company to pay American customers. The German consumers can choose to either accept the settlement or continue fighting for more money in individual lawsuits. The 2015 Dieselgate is one of the biggest car scandals in history, affecting the automotive industry on a global scale. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.